And today we're looking at President Trump's 2025 executive order on birthright citizenship. It's quite a significant policy shift, and it's definitely got people talking.
It really has. I mean, this order goes right to the heart of, well, a fundamental aspect of American citizenship,
Mm-hmm.
who gets it automatically just by being born here.
Mm-hmm.
It really zeroes in on the parent's legal status. The stated idea is to make sure citizenship is, properly valued and linked to a real connection to the U.S.
Exactly. So to really get our heads around this, we're using a couple of key sources today. First up, there's a transcript from Live Now from FFox on YouTube. It covers the Supreme Court arguments, the legal fight over this order.
Right, the challenges.
And second, we've got the official White House document itself. It's titled Protecting the Meaning and Value of American Citizenship. That lays out the policy, the reasoning behind it.
Yeah, the administration's perspective.
So, our goal for you listening is to cut through some of the noise. We want to help you understand what this order actually does, the legal issues it raises, and, the main arguments flying back and forth. Let's start with the order itself. What does it say?
Okay, well, that title, Protecting the Meaning and Value of American Citizenship, kind of sets the tone, doesn't it?
It does.
Section 1 is really key here. It mentions the 14th Amendment, obviously, but then it makes this big claim that the amendment has actually never been interpreted to just automatically give citizenship to everyone born on U.S. soil.
So it's pushing back on the common understanding.
That's the argument, yes.
Yes.
It's setting the stage for the order's specific rules, saying there's always been this jurisdictional limit.
Okay, so based on that interpretation, the order then spells out situations where being born in the U.S. wouldn't automatically mean citizenship. Can you break those down for us?
Sure. Section 1 lays out two main scenarios. The first one is if a child is born to a mother who is here unlawfully, so without legal status, and crucially, the father isn't a U.S. citizen or a green card holder, a lawful permanent resident.
Okay, mother unlawfully present, father not a citizen or LPR. What's the second one?
The second scenario is where the mother is here legally, but only temporarily. Think someone on a tourist visa, a student visa, a temporary work visa, maybe even the visa waiver program.
Right, not a permanent resident.
Exactly. And again, just like the first case, the father also isn't a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident.
So it really seems laser focused on births, where basically neither parent has that sort of deep, legally established tie to the country.
That seems to be the precise target, yes,
Yeah.
focusing on that permanent legal connection.
Got it. And when is this supposed to kick in? Is it retroactive?
No, Section 2B is very specific. It applies only to children born after 30 days from January 20th, 2025. So it's forward-looking only.
Right, so anyone born before that date isn't affected.
Correct.
And this is important. There's a group the order specifically says isn't touched by this change. Isn't that right?
Yes, absolutely. Section 2C makes a point of stating this shouldn't affect the citizenship documentation rights of others, and it specifically mentions the children of lawful permanent residents.
So green card holders' kids born here are still automatically citizens under this order.
That's explicitly carved out, yes. It highlights the deliberate focus we talked about.
Okay, so how is the government actually supposed to, put this into practice? How do they make sure someone falls into these categories and isn't recognized as a citizen at birth?
Well, Section 2A gets into the operational side. It basically tells U.S. government departments and agencies, think State Department, Homeland Security, that they should not issue or accept documents recognizing U.S. citizenship for babies born under those two scenarios we just discussed.
So no passports, no consular reports of birth abroad based on just being born here if the parents fit those criteria.
Exactly. And it also mentions not accepting documents from, say, state or local authorities if those documents claim to establish citizenship contrary to this order.
That sounds like a direct command to federal agencies, and there's an enforcement mechanism too.
Definitely. Section 3 puts the responsibility on the big players. Secretary of State, Homeland Security, the Attorney General, even the Commissioner of Social Security. They need to make sure their agency rules line up with the order. And interestingly, Section 3B requires all relevant departments to issue public guidance within 30 days explaining how they'll implement this.
So some transparency there, at least in theory.
That seems to be the goal, yes. Clear public guidelines.
And just to avoid any confusion about who counts as a parent, they even define mother and father.
They do. Section 4 defines them very specifically as the immediate female biological progenitor and immediate male biological progenitor.
Wow, okay. Very biological.
It seems designed to sidestep any potential legal arguments about adoption or other forms of parentage, focusing purely on the biological link at birth for the purpose of this order's citizenship determination.
Right. Okay, so that gives us a pretty solid picture of the executive order itself, its text and intent. Now, let's pivot to the legal storm it kicked up. The Supreme Court involvement, which the Liv Navo from FOX report covered.
Yeah, this is where things get constitutionally intense. The core legal fight, as the report lays out, boils down to one big question. Does this executive order clash with the 14th Amendment's citizenship clause?
And remind us of the exact wording there.
It says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. It seems pretty clear on its face to many people.
So the argument against the order from the critics, like those Democratic attorneys general in the report, what's their main point?
Their main point, essentially, is that the order is a direct violation of that constitutional text and, importantly, long-standing Supreme Court precedent interpreting it. They see it as the president trying to rewrite the Constitution via executive order.
An overreach of power, basically.
That's the core claim.
And the key phrase in that clause everyone seems to be fighting over is subject to the jurisdiction thereof. How does the executive order itself, the White House document, interpret that?
Well, going back to Section 1 of the order, it argues that subject to the jurisdiction has always had exceptions, that it was never meant to cover absolutely everyone physically born here.
Like children of diplomats, historically.
Exactly. And the order essentially argues that children born under the circumstances it outlines, parents unlawfully present or only temporarily present without permanent status, also fall outside that full jurisdiction in the way the amendment intended.
So it's leaning heavily on a specific interpretation of that phrase.
Very heavily. That's the linchpin of the order's legal justification.
The Live Now report mentions several state AGs leading the charge against this. Who were they?
Yes, the attorneys general from New Jersey, Washington, Massachusetts, and Connecticut were highlighted as being at the forefront of the legal challenge that reached the Supreme Court.
And what were they saying publicly? What were their arguments against the order?
Well, based on the report, their arguments were pretty forceful. They framed it as an unlawful action by the president, saying he doesn't have the power to just dismantle the 14th Amendment like this.
Strong words.
Very. The AG from Massachusetts was quoted pointing out that birthright citizenship, as generally understood, has been the law of the land for, well, close to 150 years.
Yeah.
Emphasizing the history and precedent.
The Washington AG brought up a practical nightmare scenario too, right? About uneven application.
Yes, that was a really interesting point. They talked about the potential absurdity, their word, if lower court injunctions block the order in some states but not others.
So a kid born in one state is a citizen, but another kid born under identical circumstances across the state line isn't.
Exactly. A patchwork of citizenship rules within the U.S., based purely on geography and differing court orders. That was presented as a major problem.
And Justice Sotomayor seemed to echo some of those concerns during the actual Supreme Court arguments.
She did. The report mentioned her concerns about children potentially becoming stateless, having no citizenship anywhere, and also about that confusing patchwork of rules. If the court didn't issue a clear nationwide decision, but instead let fragmented rulings stand.
Okay, so that's the case against the order. How did the administration's lawyer, the Solicitor General, defend it in court?
According to the transcript, Solicitor General John Sauer's argument focused partly on the process. He argued that these very broad nationwide injunctions from the lower courts came too quickly.
Meaning
They stopped the policy cold before the administration could even fully roll it out, develop the specific procedures, and demonstrate how it would actually work in practice. He suggested those injunctions prevented a fair assessment.
So the argument was partly, you didn't even let us show you how this works.
That seems to be a key part of it, yes. That the full picture was never allowed to emerge because of the early court blocks.
Did the justices press him on the practicalities? I think Justice Kavanaugh had questions.
Yes. The report specifically mentioned Justice Kavanaugh asking about the nitty-gritty implementation. Like, what exactly happens at the hospital? Who decides? How are documents handled?
And did he get clear answers?
The report noted that the Solicitor General didn't provide, let's say, fully detailed answers on those specific points during the arguments. The practical mechanics seemed less fleshed out, at least in that exchange.
The report also mentioned a sort of dual track to the Supreme Court hearing. What did that mean?
Right. It meant that justices seemed to be wrestling with two separate, though related, issues. First, the big one, Is the executive order itself constitutional? Does it violate the 14th Amendment?
Okay, the core substantive question.
Exactly. But second, they were also looking at the process issue. Are these nationwide injunctions where one district judge can halt a policy across the entire country actually appropriate, or do they go too far?
So even if they had doubts about the order itself, they might still have issues with how it was blocked.
Precisely. And we know some justices have aired views on that before.
Who, for example?
Well, Justice Gorsuch has previously questioned the broad power of these nationwide injunctions issued by lower courts against presidential actions.
Mm-hmm.
And Justice Alito reportedly made a pretty pointed comment during the argument, something about district court judges maybe suffering from an occupational disease of thinking they're always right and can basically do whatever they want with these injunctions.
Oof. Okay, so some clear skepticism there about the injunctions themselves, separate from the birthright citizenship question.
It certainly seems that way, yes. That procedural issue was definitely on the table.
So, reading the tea leaves from the oral arguments, what was the vibe? How did the justices seem to be leaning, generally speaking?
It's always tricky to predict, but the report suggested a split. You had justices like Kagan and Sotomayor who sounded pretty skeptical about the administration's core legal argument regarding the 14th Amendment.
Okay.
But then you had others, like Justice Kavanaugh, who seemed maybe more focused on the practical implementation side, the how does this actually work questions, and perhaps also that injunction issue we just discussed.
So, not a clear consensus apparent from the arguments.
Not obviously, no. Different justices seemed focused on different facets of the case.
And the report also mentioned legal experts like Professor John Yoo weighing in.
Yes, Professor Yu was cited as someone who believes that changing something as fundamental as birthright citizenship, as it's been understood, isn't something you can do with just an executive order.
What would it take, in his view?
His view, as reported, is that it would require an actual constitutional amendment, that the principle is too deeply rooted in the Constitution and history for anything less.
That's a high bar.
A very high bar, yes.
So, putting all this together, the order, the arguments, the justices' questions, what are the potential ways this could shake out at the Supreme Court?
Well, the Live Now report laid out a few possibilities. The court could simply uphold the block on the order, saying it likely violates the Constitution, and that would be that for now.
Okay, maintain the status quo.
Or they could focus on that injunction issue. Maybe they say the nationwide block was too broad. They could scale it back, potentially allowing the order to take effect in some places while legal challenges continue. That would lead to that patchwork situation.
Right, the scenario the Washington AG warned about.
Exactly. Or there's even a chance the court could sort of punt on the main question for now. They might find a narrower reason to decide this specific case without making a huge definitive ruling on the ultimate meaning of birthright citizenship under the 14th Amendment.
Kicking the can down the road, perhaps?
Possibly. Waiting for maybe a different case or a more developed record. These are all just potential outcomes based on the reporting of the arguments, of course.
Of course. Well, this is clearly incredibly complex and really significant. It digs into fundamental questions about who is an American, what citizenship means, and how we interpret, our Constitution.
Absolutely.
So, for you listening, if we boil it down, this executive order aims to change who automatically gets citizenship at birth by focusing on the parent's legal status. It's a major shift from the long-standing interpretation.
Right, and it immediately ran into serious legal roadblocks going all the way up to the Supreme Court.
Where the justices are weighing not just the order's constitutionality under the 14th Amendment, but also how lower courts have tried to block it. We've looked at what the order actually says, who it targets, who it exempts, and the core arguments on both sides.
And, thinking about the history here,
Yeah.
the White House document itself brings up the Dred Scott case, which the 14th Amendment was partly designed to overturn. It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Okay.
Well, given that history, this whole modern debate over subject to the jurisdiction thereof, what does it really tell us about how we're still figuring out what American citizenship means? Who belongs? Who gets to be part of we the people? Seeing these different interpretations clash really says something about where we are now and maybe where we're heading.
That is definitely something to chew on. A powerful final thought. We really encourage you to keep exploring this. Maybe look into the history of the 14th Amendment debates, the different ways subject to the jurisdiction has been understood over time. It's a deep topic. Thank you for joining us for this in-depth look.